Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. July 10th, 2025, the Who Wants a Third Party Anyway edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. Also in Washington, D.C., I think, or possibly, because she lives down the block from me, Susan Glasser, staff writer at The New Yorker, making her Gabfest debut, I believe. Hello, Susan.
Hey, I'm so happy to be with you, and indeed down the block from you, here in Swamp Lake, Washington, D.C.
Yes. And in swampy New York City, unless he is traveling, the beloved former colleague Mike Pesca, host of the daily news podcast, The Gist. Hello, Mike.
Hello. What an institution is the Gabfest. You can't even keep track if people have been on before. Esteemed New Yorker writers, maybe, who knows?
I feel like maybe Susan was a guest before, but I don't.
She's
maybe
certainly informing it, if not explicitly.
I feel like I've been in the Slate family of podcasts many times, but I feel like this invitation has eluded me up until now, David. So I'm honored to have finally made the cut.
I know she wasn't ever on Hang Up and Listen. That I could tell you.
Yeah, she's not. I don't think Susan's like the sports center. No, you are. You like tennis or something? Am I misremembering?
I do, but please don't quiz me.
Anyway, John and Emily are both continuing to enjoy their well-deserved vacations. They'll be back next week. This week on the Gabfest, is a third party possible? Is it a good idea? What to make of Elon Musk's quixotic scheme to start a new party? Then, no weapons for Ukraine, more weapons for Ukraine, bombing Iran, but that was 2 weeks ago. A Gaza ceasefire now or not, whatever. Is there any method to Trump's foreign policy? Then it's summer rerun season for tariffs. What should we make of the latest Trumpian psychodrama about international trade? Plus, we will have cocktail chatter.
Love espresso, drip coffee, and cold brew? With the Ninja Luxe Cafe, if you can crave it, you can brew it. Espresso, balanced. Drip coffee, rich. Cold brew in a flash. With Barista Assist technology, you brew with no stress and no guesswork and make perfect silky microfoam hands-free from dairy or plant-based milks. Shop the Ninja Luxe Cafe at ninjakitchen.com.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
Elon Musk continues to flirt with the idea of starting the third party. The idea of Elon Musk flirting actually is slightly terrifying. I bet he's a terrible flirt. I bet that would not be something he's good at. His goal seems to be to create a small party that could be a tipping point, a fulcrum in Congress that allies with one side or the other to do something. And we're going to talk about what that something is, if we can even discern what it would be. It will fail because it is structurally nearly impossible to start a third party in American politics, for reasons that Susan will explain. So, Susan Glasser, I suspect this whole effort will fail for 3 reasons, but you can pick them. The reasons I would pick is 1, Musk's attention span is infinitesimal, so he won't stick with it. 2, it doesn't appear to have a coherent idea. There isn't a coherent idea behind it, and certainly not a coherent idea that is popular, that the public is demanding. And 3, American politics is structurally designed to prevent third parties. So discuss any of those that you wish to pick on.
Yeah, I mean, the only quibble and the only question really, David, is the order of those 3, right? Is number 1 through 10, arguably, is American politics is structurally designed to make this a non-starter.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, look, the two-party system is embedded in everything about how we run elections. And it's the reason, by the way, that we still have Trump and that we're still stuck with Donald Trump a decade from now, because he in the past had flirted with Ross Perot's Reform Party, for example, thought about running for president, and that didn't happen. It's Trump's takeover of the Republican Party with its institutional and infrastructure advantages that has enabled this whole disaster over the last decade. If Trump was just Trump, even with the same level of popularity, Wouldn't matter. It's because he has essentially the hollowed out institutional framework of the Republican Party that he's now hijacked and made his own. So, I do think your point is well taken about Elon Musk. Not only an incredibly short attention span, incoherent ideology, and a lack of, any real sort of meaningful charisma or connection with people that might actually make them want to follow him. Even if you look at how people have talked about this since he floated this idea, they don't even know what kind of a party it would be. I've seen it described as possibly a centrist party. I've seen it described as, a way to collect and siphon off the extremist MAGA conspiracy theory far right of Trump's coalition. Those are very much at odds. You can't have a centrist party that's also a conspiracy theory MAGA party. And I think that just speaks to the incoherence of it. But by the way, can this man spend millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on this project? Yes, absolutely. That can cause a lot of trouble.
Mike, if you were Elon Musk, God forbid, if you were Elon Musk, is there a space in the American political system where there is appetite for a third party that would create, that there would actually be public demand and public excitement? The Republican Party, as people like to remind you, was a third party that was created sort of out of the anti-slavery elements of the American public that couldn't find a home elsewhere. So that was 180 years ago.
1854. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from the relics of the Whigs comes Elon Musk, who, by the way, we know, is he a good flirt? He does get flirted with, right? One of his dozen baby mamas told him to go to horny jail and wound up having a child with him. It was famously reported. This is just some of the baggage / branding that Elon Musk brings with the idea of a third party. So when I studied political science, and this touches on a lot of the basic mechanics of it, the fundamentals, there was something called Dervager's law, I think it was pronounced. And it was the idea that in our system, it's going to be two parties. Then there was a lot of other political science saying, well, India is kind of like our system. It has a lot of parties. But the point is, there's something other than just sclerotic tradition that has prevented a third party from really breaking through. Although a Ross Perot occasionally is a spoiler, and Teddy Roosevelt, the Bull Moose Party. To your question, I think there is a market for it, but it's not a 44% market or whatever you'd need to actually win, say, a presidency. And I don't know what Elon Musk, and I don't even know if Elon Musk knows consistently what his ideology is. He definitely wants to hurt Trump a little bit. He says, and I think because he wants some rationality in markets, he's not in favor of massive budget deficit buildups. I mean, that informed his Doge activities, but I don't think America is so there that agrees with him so much. And it's a funny thing about third parties that they're great in abstract because they can be empty vessels, and the person who hears about them can say, yeah, I want that. Someone to outflank the Republicans or outflank the Democrats or be right in the middle. And you never have to define what it is, to your point. And I was also looking at the chart, the Gallup chart they've been asking since 2004. Do we need a third party, or are the two parties doing very well? And we need a third party usually does pretty well because of the empty vessel thing, but it narrows, and the two parties are doing well. Exactly, that comes into play exactly at times of elections when our presidents are out there making the affirmative case about why to vote for them. And then people say, yeah, one of these two guys will suffice.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point, Susan, which is that there's a third space that Musk could occupy, which is there's a centrist space, there's a crazy conspiracist space, and there's also a libertarian space, arguably, which is separate. And they're all mutually incoherent. If Musk does go ahead and spend a lot of money on this, which of the two major parties does it benefit, Susan?
Oh, I think it certainly hurts the Republican Party because of what Musk has done in his Doge incarnation, and the wild spectacle of his Twitter feed, his insane racist rants, conspiracy theories, embrace of Trump leaping around the stage with him. Democrats are not going to support Elon Musk, even disaffected Democrats at this point. And I think he's just made such common cause with the most extremist right-wing elements in our society that there's a reason that Trump has gone from sort of just dismissing Musk to, expressions of real alarm and concern about it. The two reasons are, number one, Musk's incredibly deep pockets, because Donald Trump knows that they were harnessed on his own behalf in the 2024 election. And then number two, the fact that there is an increasingly concerned extremist elements of his own coalition. You see that this week very much in the sort of almost MAGA riot that's happening in far right commentary over this issue of the Jeffrey Epstein files. That, by the way, Elon Musk is fanning the flames of that. So you see him acting already as a provocateur and a kind of an agent of disaffection and disarray on the right wing of America. And I'm reminded of this fantastic quote from the scholar Richard Hofstadter. I think it was Jonah Goldberg who cited this week, but it's very apt to this conversation. Hofstadter said a few decades ago, asked about third parties, he said, they're like bees. Once they've accomplished their sting, they die. And, the sting here is Elon Musk wanting to burn Donald Trump after their very messy public breakup.
It is fascinating to me, just as a matter of psychopathology, to watch Musk being pulled deeper and deeper into political life. It just seems like he's just making himself more unpopular. He spends his time making himself miserable, endangering his company, and yet there's some moth to flame quality of being involved in politics that he cannot resist. I mean, he'd be so much better off. I can tell you, Elon, you would be so much better off if you just stopped doing this, just went back, focused on engineering, having babies, tweeting,
going to Mars,
like focus on that. And you will find so much more life satisfaction than you will in whatever insane, personal demon you're trying to solve here. Mike, why are you chuckling?
Because the rational person advice to Elon Musk genre is like, it's great for us, the rational people. But this is a guy who just wants to sleep on the floor of his Tesla factories and yell at people and take copious amounts of stimulants. I think that
he thinks of himself as a hyper rationalist, though. That's what's so funny about it. Like so many of these people, he's like a hyper rationalist who behaves in crazy ways all the time.
Yeah. But earlier, David, you said, and it's true, the coherence of the different strains that the party could be are incoherent. But I would caution you about that in our current political climate. I do think that things like attention and what we would judge as, well, these things don't go together. How many violations of that have we already seen, right? What is Maha except some lunatic fringe plus the reasonable worries of a demographic that you would not normally think would align with those people? And you can get a coalition together on those lines. It doesn't have to be a big coalition, but you assemble a few of them and you could create that wasp sting. The interesting thing that Elon is doing or has articulated, though we don't even know what his party will stand for, is he is pretty smartly saying, and we'll run a couple of senators and maybe 8 House seats. And given our slim margins, they can be deal breakers. And if you just look back to where the House and Senate are now, that is a fact. I don't know if he can get there. Let's take into account everything we've been saying about his deficits. But that is a pretty wise judgment about where you can get some leverage in the American political system. With a third party, he does have a lot of money, right? And he does have people who rank highly. Mark Cuban is someone who maybe can be affiliated and, I don't know, convinced to run for Senate. But there are people out there who aren't just, PewDiePie who will run for office.
Susan, why do you think the kind of more independent centrist senatorial bloc, like the Murkowski, Fetterman, Collins group, has never decided, hey, let's affiliate ourselves and be a tipping point and be a fulcrum?
Well, I think back really to the very beginning of when I was reporting in Washington a long, long time ago. And there was every single iteration I've ever seen of Capitol Hill. There's a group of centrists, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or, both. And people look at the math and they say, well, these people could really be in charge of Congress. They could actually, they're the decisive votes. They could, and it fails always, always, always to take into account the psychology and the personality of the people who put themselves in the middle. The moderate middle, by definition, is never going to hijack Congress. And that is one kind of big fact I've learned, in the, the hedgehog and the fox. This is my big truth about Washington is, don't just think of it as math and, well, they have the vote, so they're going to be in charge. And it always tends to be a faction, whether it's on the right or the left, whether it's people who have institutional power, but it's going to be a harder line faction that really has the willingness to be ruthless enough to really run Congress. And so you have these people who are stuck in the middle, and look at the spectacle of Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins over the last decade of Trump taking over the Republican Party, much to their dismay. They've had clearly discomfort at every step along the way. Neither of them have left the Republican Party. Neither of them have become Trumpists. Both of them have made accommodationist votes at various times that will forever be associated with them. To this day, I can't go anywhere with somebody's going to quote to you Susan Collins and say, she's really, really concerned, which of course was her great comment about Donald Trump, back in the first term, when she then went along with his Supreme Court nominees, when she went along with not voting to convict him in his first impeachment trial. Lisa Murkowski just provides the deciding vote. She single-handedly could have done what John McCain did in the first term when he stopped Donald Trump from repealing the Obamacare Healthcare Act. She didn't do it. She single-handedly approved a bill that adds more than $4 trillion to the deficit, that takes millions and millions of Americans off of their Medicaid healthcare, takes away food stamps from hungry children. And after she voted for the bill, she said, yeah, this is not a good bill, and I wish that it wasn't the bill that we just approved.
It helps.
Yeah, but you got tax breaks for whaling captains, so you got to weigh that. Yeah,
all the whalers. Let's close actually, Mike, with Dan Osborne. So Dan Osborne ran in 2024 in the Senate against Deb Fischer, a Republican senator from Nebraska, and he ran as an independent. There was no Democratic nominee. Osborne ran saying he would caucus with nobody. He was independent. He is a union activist, but he affiliated with no party, and came within 7 points of beating Deb Fischer in a state that Trump won by 20 points. He's now announced he's going to run against Pete Ricketts, who was appointed to fill a Senate seat, the other Senate seat in Nebraska, and Ricketts is up in 2026, and so will now face Osborne in another race where Democrats will almost surely not field anyone and attempt to get all the money and attention towards Osborne. Does he have a chance? And is this a model that Democrats and Republicans should pursue in states where their party is unpopular?
He's got a chance. I'd say he's got a chance. He's going against Ricketts, who is, I think, affiliated with the Cubs dynasty, so you always have a chance. I think that there is a certain quirky, sui generis type candidate in states where one of the party's brand is toxic or moribund, and this is not the odds-on play, but it's the best play. And Osborne's a good candidate. He's now known to the public. He's also not a defector. So someone like Charlie Crist, who has been in all different, the two different parties, but at different times, he can run plausibly and accurately and say, I've been an independent all my life. And he's a pretty good candidate. Ricketts is pretty good too, from what I understand. I think that he's a former governor who is in pretty good stead with Nebraska. But this is what you have to do, given how bad the party brands are in so many states. Just Republicans basically ceasing to exist in places like New York and all throughout the Midwest, in places where they used to be pretty strong, the Democrats, because we have partisan sorting and a whole lot of other things and associations with national trends that your average person in any place outside of one precinct of Omaha really cottons to. So, yeah, I think he could do it. I think a guy like McMullen in Utah, that was his best play also. We're going to have to see a win before we start seeing a lot of people doing this. It's a desperate best of all options play, but I'm really interested to see how Osborne does. He ran a very good campaign last time, but still, like you said, lost by 7.
So, Susan, do you think, do you see any other states where this is happening? You've heard of other candidates, any other possibilities like this? Because it does also require the Democrats in this state case to clear the field, to basically say, hey, we give up.
Well, that's right. It's a sign of Democratic weakness in the state and the toxicity of the Democratic brand, as Mike put it. Look, in Nebraska, there is a certain tradition of kind of maverick party bucking, a certain independence, going your own way. It's the only state in the country that has a unicameral legislature, for example. So, it does things differently in its politics. The scenario for Osborne is that this is not a presidential election year when you get the much more kind of party line partisan but infrequent voters. And one of the structural shifts in politics that's happened over the course of the Trump era is a kind of flip-flopping in the two parties' turnout models and in the two parties' rules. As the Republican coalition has become more working class, more populist, as Democrats have really cornered the market on college graduate voters, people who come year in and year out for elections, that means that they have done, relatively speaking, better in the off-year elections. They can count on their people to come out to vote more. And so that bodes well and suggests that Osborne may have a better performance than in the presidential year when there are just too many kind of infrequent pro-Trump voters coming out and they were just going to go down the line with their Republican Party votes.
Yeah, that's really important. The median non-voter is now, for the first time in generations, a Republican. That's never used to happen before.
For those who want more out of every moment this summer, Mazda has more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than any other brand as of May 2025. What more could you ask for? Discover how Mazda has more to move you today. Visit iihs.org to learn more.
Every Mazda SUV offers you an elevated driving experience and refined performance. Discover it at Mazda of New Rochelle.
Take the next 30 seconds to invest in yourself with Vanguard. Breathe in. Center your mind. Recognize the power you have to direct your financial future. Feel the freedom that comes with reaching your goals and building a life you love. Vanguard brings you this meditation because we invest where it matters most, in you. Visit Vanguard.com/investing in you to learn more. All investing is subject to risk.
So it's always been very hard to follow Trump's foreign policy. It is, I would say, careening across the highway even more than ever. So Susan, please start by describing some of the wild swings that are taking place from the Trump administration in foreign affairs and where they come from.
Well, careening is a good word, but the truth is that if you sit where Donald Trump sits, it's not careening at all, because his definition of foreign policy, as with his definition of domestic policy, is whatever I want and whenever I want it. And it's all through the prism of his self-interest. He conflates the national interest with his self-interest. There are no permanent allies, no permanent enemies with Donald Trump, because it's all filtered through the lens of himself. And I think that is just, I know it's a key fact that we all kind of know after so many years of this, but it tends to be obscured, I think, by the realms of normalizing commentary that are just inevitable. Donald Trump isn't sitting there with a strategic plan. He's sitting there with himself, and that's the policy process. And of course, that's part of the permanent crisis of Donald Trump, is that it truly is much more being dictated by him personally than people are willing to believe, because it's so insane that a nation of this stature and power and size could actually have just a guy sitting in his gold-covered office deciding at the, sort of on the whim of the moment, like, bring me a Diet Coke and, get me Vladimir Putin on the phone. So the big thing that happened this week, right, is that Donald Trump, for the first time, essentially ever, has finally realized what most of the rest of us realized a long time ago, which is that Putin has been playing him for a fool over these last few months. And he said, I'm tired of the bullshit from Putin. And that was the word that he used. Again, shock realization here on Donald Trump's part. What does it really mean? I once heard a fascinating discussion with someone who had been very close to Donald Trump and then fell out with him later. But this person was listening to a bunch of pundit types talk in a very knowledgeable way about Donald Trump's strategy. And actually, it was about dealing with Putin. This was in his first term. And he sat there for a while, listened to this, and he just interrupted. He said, people, there is no strategy with Donald Trump. You must understand that. Like, his time horizon for anything that he does is 30 seconds. Okay. It is not, he is just looking to get through the next news cycle, the next phone call, the next couple hours. And I can't underscore that enough. So does it mean that Donald Trump is now permanently soured on Vladimir Putin and permanently resolved to return to supporting Ukraine? No, of course it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean, I think, is very profound for foreign policy. And it means that you really can't count on the United States as an ally, as a partner, as a superpower in this Trump era. We are going to be swerving wildly because that is the nature of how our policy is being made right now.
So, Mike, we heard a lot when Trump has been out of office about the deep state and the kind of how policy is made by the deep state. And one of the things that just occurred to me, so there's this name that keeps coming up in all the reading that we're doing, Bridge Colby, person I literally have never heard of. But Bridge Colby apparently is now making American defense policy. He's an undersecretary.
Put some respect on the name of Elbridge Colby.
Elbridge Colby.
Colby.
I couldn't, but he goes by Bridge, I guess.
A bridge to the 19th century.
And so it appears that here's this person who is a policymaker who's really concerned about China. He's a real China hawk who is doing all kinds of things. He apparently has just ordered a review of the U.S. relationship with Australia, such that maybe Australia won't get some submarines that it's planning to buy from the U.S. He's tried to stop weapon shipments to Ukraine, and here's this person who nobody knows anything about, unelected, like, who is making policy within the Pentagon, in part because there is no strategy. There's a vacuum, and so he is in that vacuum.
Well, there's no policy. There's a vacuum. That vacuum's name is Pete Hegseth, who's appointed because he looked good on the Backup Sunday show for Fox. So you have someone who at least has strong inclinations about these things. They might not be Donald Trump's inclinations, but what are Donald Trump's inclinations, as Susan said? That's the upside to what Susan was saying, that there is no strategy. He will frequently also disappoint those within his coalition who thought he was an isolationist, because he has, call them instincts, call them spasms. And sometimes the instincts are right, or at least align with what I would like. It's a little like what's
right, or what I would like. Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be generous. I think that, to take, for example, the non-obliteration, but I think effective bombing of Fordo, the more time passes, the more it looks like that was the right call, in my opinion. Okay, but when you were talking about what about the forces within his orbit and the deep state, the analogy I was thinking of just came up this week with all the nonsense about Jeffrey Epstein, which is that Trump was fine stoking the nonsense, maybe not even weighing in on if it was nonsense. But then when it came time to actually make a decision, he just jettisoned all that and made the decision he was going to make. This is the upside of not having some grand strategy or grand plan or thing that you do because it's the right way to do it. And now he's getting upset with Putin because he's childish and it's all based on transaction. But it was interesting to me because, yeah, he did use the word bullshit, but I think I have the quote right here that was in the Wall Street Journal. "We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin," he said during a cabinet meeting. That's good. It was during a cabinet meeting. Adding that the Russian leader was nice, but a lot of what he said turned out to be meaningless. I would propose that the Russian leader is not nice, but a lot of what he says, like "I'm going to invade Ukraine," turns out to be meaningful. So Trump just gets things totally backwards, but every once in a while, the thing that he contradicts is a bad thing. We muddle through. And the last thing I'll say is the normal way of doing foreign policy that both the Republican and Democratic establishments adhered to did need some shaking up, I think. And he got some, I mean, he probably thinks he's some great negotiator, but he got some positive outcomes by being that chaos agent who, for instance, plausibly goes into a NATO meeting and saying, you guys have to, quote unquote, pay more. We know it's a percentage of their foreign policy. And when the Biden administration, everyone before them asked nicely, NATO wouldn't do it. And then when JD Vance comes in and says, we really mean it, and by the way, we hate you guys, that happens. That changes.
Yeah, so that's actually not true. See, this is a great example. It's not your fault, Mike, but it's like a great example of Donald Trump and his incredible, what he's great at doing is bullshit spin. What he's great at doing is creating an alternate reality and getting millions of people to buy into it. Even the people who are critical of him often accept his frameworks. So the person who made NATO members spend billions and billions of dollars more on defense is Vladimir Putin. That is the person who did it. And actually, it goes back to before Donald Trump to Barack Obama, when NATO members in 2014, because of Vladimir Putin's takeover and illegal annexation of Crimea, they agreed in 2014 that they were going to raise the amount of their GDP that they spend on defense, and that they were going to give themselves 10 years to get up to this threshold of 2%.
Well, of course that was.
Then
of course
Donald
that
Trump
was
came in and he pressured them, he hectored them, he cajoled them. But what he really did was to undermine belief in the integrity of this alliance, which is premised on the idea of mutual defense. And Vladimir Putin knew from the second that Donald Trump became the president of the United States that actually that guarantee at the core of NATO was meaningless. And someday, it strikes me, he will probably test that. Then he invaded Ukraine in a full-scale way in 2022. That's when you see a massive increase in defense spending and a massive kind of belated recognition of the reality by many European leaders that their security was permanently under threat. Now, Trump is returned, and in order not to have a full blow up of NATO, they've chosen the course of, suck-uppery, which, by the way, really is effective, even if none of us would want to undertake that. And what have they done? They've agreed to a 5% goal of their GDP over the next 10 years, right? So maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. Presumably Donald Trump will be long gone from the scene, but they don't have a big fight with Donald Trump. He gets the win. And to me, it's just a fascinating example of how the entire world has had to reorient itself to this incredibly incoherent, sort of monstrously uninformed leader who happens to be at the helm of, the biggest superpower in the world. And, it's just one of my bugaboos. It's not you. I mean, Donald Trump has gotten millions of people to accept this framework that he's the guy who is increasing defense spending in the world. But actually, it's the actions of Vladimir Putin combined with now the actual terror of our allies that the United States is no longer going to be there for them when they need them.
Right. So obviously, Vladimir Putin's aggression concentrates the mind. But I'm also basing this on when someone advocates for a position and that position is actually eventually adhered to, you have to go back and say, was there any portion of the advocacy that came into play? And I was recently reading in the New Yorker, they quoted Gideon Rose of Foreign Policy, of Council on Foreign Relations, who said, like a lot of other people, that Gates would come in 2007 in a Munich conference and he makes a speech and everyone says that's nice. And then J.D. Vance comes in and he actually gets everyone's attention. So obviously without Putin invading borders and being in a country right next to NATO countries, it wouldn't have happened. And yet some credit, or at least weird coincidence, must be given to what Donald Trump and his administration have been advocating for. I'll also say in Israel, his policies, I can't say they've been good, but they've changed things in a way and they've moved the chess pieces. And I think maybe we're on the brink of an end of that horrible conflict. And I don't know if Donald Trump gets credit for that, but he would certainly look back and say what happened in Israel was good for the United States and good for us. And without me doing the things I was doing, including advocating for, the crazy Mara Gaza, without essentially the idea of ethnic cleansing, maybe we wouldn't have moved the needle like we did. So these are things just to maybe steelman the Donald Trump way and the foreign policy.
Can I just quickly, first of all, you don't get credit for, going and kicking the shit out of your friends and partners and saying basically, your money or your life. That's just not. Is that something you want to say is credit? The reason that JD Vance came to Europe and he, first of all, he said, "Oh, you guys are so mean to these right-wing, essentially skinhead nationalist parties in Germany. How dare you be so mean to these wonderful people in the AfD?" First of all, that was actually the core of his message, was that Europe was way too mean to the extremist, racist right wing in Europe writ large, number one. Number two, you have J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. The policy, the reason that they are scaring European allies into spending billions more and trying to figure out how they might take on more of their own defense functions is because we've essentially said we no longer are abiding by our role as your ally. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, do you give them credit for a smart foreign policy for saying that we might go ahead and take over, possibly by using military force, the territory of one of our NATO allies, Denmark, in Greenland? Is it a sort of brilliant foreign policy repositioning to say, actually, Canada, our good friend and neighbor for 100 years? No, maybe you should just not be an independent country anymore. So there's this interesting question about sort of everything being this zero-sum ledger. And as long as Donald Trump can get people, even people who dislike him, to say, well, he should get some credit for being such an asshole, that's one aspect of it. But then I think, just to pull back, remember, Donald Trump came in promising things he could not deliver. And a lot of this frenzy of words and, sort of obfuscation is to obfuscate the fact that he hasn't been able to succeed. So he came in, he said he was going to create peace between Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. He came in and he said he was going to end Israel's war in Gaza, that he was going to make peace in the Middle East. He wanted to make a peace deal with the Iranians. As you know, he claimed in his first term he was going to have, and in fact had already made a brilliant deal to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula with North Korea. None of those things happen because the world is a complicated place where countries have long-term national interests as opposed to the individual whims of their leader. And I think it's similar with tariffs, which I know we'll talk about later, but a lot of this is because Donald Trump made wildly outsized claims that he couldn't deliver on to transform the world through the power of his personal magnetism. And now we're seeing, in part, his frustration with Vladimir Putin because he's recognizing that Putin would rather conquer Ukraine and take over this territory than he would make nice with Donald Trump.
My only point was not that Donald Trump has a good or coherent or honest or consistent foreign policy, but it started off by saying he has a 30-second time horizon. And there are areas in the foreign policy where he would say, and he's probably doing the thing where he's giving himself all the credit, that either it all worked out or what I wanted to do is what actually wound up happening. So I don't know that threatening Greenland or trying to take over Canada does anything to help the U.S. foreign policy, but I do think it's quite possible he will say with the Israel situation, yeah, that was good. I played that one right. And he played it more or less within his framework of jumping all over the place. He did play it more or less consistently. There are areas that we can look at and say, all right, I'm not going to give it to him, but I could see why he would say that was my plan all along. Sometimes he has what amounts to a plan all along.
I mean, Mike, like what Donald Trump tells himself is really not interesting. Donald Trump tells himself he's a massive success all the time. Like everything that Donald Trump does is a huge success in Donald Trump's mind. That's not really the quest. That's not really, to me, the standard by which we should judge him.
Right. But there are through lines and consistencies to take Iran not having a bomb. That's something where he would say, yes, I've always been consistent about that, even though I have all these contradictions, which saying we're not going to get into a long war. You know, he says everything in the opposite. So it's hard to know what he thinks and it's hard to know what to think. But if you did a scatter plot of what he's said much more than often, there are through lines. There is some version of consistency sometimes.
Man, let's just, we could talk about this. Susan, I feel could talk about this for a while. I could talk about that for a while, but let's move on.
Juguemos a Adivina el precio de Burlington. El regreso escolar significa volver a ahorrar. Traemos jeans para tus niños desde, un momento, solo $11.99. Burlington pasa el examen. ¿Y qué tal las mochilas con personajes? Las tenemos desde $12.99. Burlington lo ha vuelto a hacer. ¿Y los tenis para niños? Marcas de primera y a la última moda desde $11.99. Ya puedes ahorrar. Burlington, marcas, rebajas, wow. Los estilos y selección varían por tienda.
You set the table, put on a playlist, even made the lasagna from scratch. And now you're wearing it. OxyClean Max Force Spray tackles tough, set-in stains the first time. Adulting is hard. Fighting stains shouldn't be. OxyClean Max Force. It's not clean unless it's OxyClean.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
The 90-day deadline post-Liberation Day came and went last week. And like the producer of a extremely tedious reality TV show, which is what Trump used to be, he has added another twist. There's another twist in the plot. There's going to be 3 more weeks for most of the countries subject to his bizarre reciprocal tariffs. They will get 3 more weeks to negotiate a deal. Meanwhile, Trump also decided to add a bunch of new tariffs that need to be worked out. So there are new tariffs on copper, and he threatened Korea and Japan, arguably our best friends in Asia, with huge new tariffs on all the hundreds of billions of dollars of things they export to the United States. So, Mike, tariffs are important. They're mostly boring. But when Trump had Liberation Day in April, markets reacted with a meltdown. There was a sense like this is going to be disastrous for the global economy. This week, or these past couple of weeks, the markets have barely reacted. Are they not reacting because they have internalized this taco, Trump always chickens out, or because of some other reason? Like that, or they've accepted these tariffs are going to go into effect and that's fine?
Yes, they've priced. I mean, if you talk to the people who are in the markets, they priced it in. They priced in what essentially tariffs are, essentially a tax on consumers. They're seeing a slight dampening or depression of what the economic output could be absent the tariffs. And they know that. I don't think they think that Trump is always going to chicken out. I think that he loves the negotiation, and tariffs are boring. He's trying to make it interesting for himself, where he gets all these quote unquote deals, even though there's only been 2 on paper and one supposed one with Vietnam. So what Donald Trump did was he really tried an earnest version of this in April. And then he saw one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, not pestilence, war, fear, or death, but the bond market. And he knew that in this instance, there could be real world consequences. And that stays with a man. And so I don't think he's going to plunge the economy or the bond market into chaos, but I do think he'll do toe touches with these damaging to consumers, damaging to the very people who he swore he would help improve the lives of and the purchasing power of. And the market knows that. It's not a good thing. And the uncertainties, the 2 things are the uncertainty's bad. And then even if you inserted certainty, what that certainty would be with 50% tariffs on copper, that's also bad.
So, Susan, the demands are crazy. The demands, particularly on Korea, are very specifically crazy. We have a free trade agreement with Korea. It's genuinely bizarre to say you have to have tariffs on Korea because Korea, you're doing something wrong. What Korea is doing is it's just not buying as many goods from the United States as we are buying from Korea, because either they don't want American goods or American goods are no good, or there's just less demand for it. So it's a crazy kind of conflict.
That's exactly right. I mean, David, look, this is, I'm glad you said that, because I think we tend to put this patina, this veneer of rationality by even having conversations around Trump's policies, his ideology, his goals. I mean, this is insanity. Try to read. I actually read, and I suggest that people do this because it's a reminder of the insanity of the moment we're living in. Sit down and spend 2 seconds reading one of the letters that Donald Trump sent to our allies and trading partners.
They're crazy.
First of all, it's written by like a third grader on cocaine. I mean, it's literally like, someone who can't spell, who can't write a sentence, obviously personally dictated by Trump himself, including with his sort of bizarre, like, rehash of 18th century, like, orthography with, like, bizarre random capitalizations of words in the middle of sentences. And it's basically incoherent, ignorant, uninformed, the idea that people don't stop him anymore, right? There are no internal checks anymore on Donald Trump's power, because if there were, any rational chief of staff in the White House would have never let a letter like that be sent. It's humiliating to the United States of America. And in some ways, that's the thing that we should be focused on, right? Is that we have the opposite of a rational actor in the White House. That's, I think, important to say. The other thing that's important to say, right, is that this entire self-created economic uncertainty and potential economic crisis is as a result of a complete misunderstanding of how the global economy works. And I find it just amazing that Trump succeeds again and again and again by acclimatizing and acculturating people to accepting the unthinkable. And to me, you asked, this original question was about Wall Street and why aren't they, why isn't the market crashing now that once again, it's clear he wants to proceed with tariffs, and that he's now even targeting specifically some of our biggest trading partners and allies in Asia. And I think part of it is that Trump has learned over time that the big shock and awe may prompt a large backlash. That's what happened in April with the Liberation Day tariffs and the Wall Street plunge. But that if he does it in bits and pieces, people get used to it. And, you look at the things that are now accepted more or less that this Trump 2.0 administration is doing, that people screamed and yelled about, including Republicans in Trump 1.0. And you see how that technique works. So I think, I'm ready to challenge the taco conventional wisdom to a certain extent, because it seems to me that Trump is not caving on tariffs. What he's doing is negotiating on tariffs, but making it very clear that he will not give them up. And it's just a question of when and what the exact numbers are.
Right. I mean, we have 10% tariffs on basically everything now, which we didn't have.
Right, which is essentially across the board, by the way, tax hike on Americans.
One of the things I'm interested in, Mike, is this attention economy piece of it, which is that Trump, a lot of what Trump does, he does for attention. He does because it creates drama, and it causes people to act as supplicants towards him. So he likes it when people come to negotiate deals, and Vietnam has agreed to a deal. He's very glad that Vietnam is a supplicant. But one of the problems with this tariff story is that it is kind of tedious. It's gone on a really long time. It created a lot of annoyance for people, and they're sort of bored by it. And so what I wonder is there any, do you foresee him giving up on tariffs? Not necessarily giving up. Do you see him making tariffs less a part of the whole screenplay that he's writing, because it's just not interesting to the public anymore? I don't think anyone was so excited to learn that, there's another Liberation Day, or there's another deadline on August 1st. It's like, all right, can we just get this over with?
Yeah. So, I mean, Susan's point is that he's going to use the tedium to actually pass the tariffs. And I think you're asking, or by your question, I can infer that perhaps the tedium will play into it, that it bores him and he'll give up the part of the tariffs that have real life consequences. I think the markets will, even though they've hit all sorts of highs, and NVIDIA is now a $4 trillion company. And by the way, that was not supposed to have happened, right? The Chinese were supposed to have invented an AI that we didn't even anticipate. There was supposed to be a great shakeup in the market. Nothing, by the market, I mean the stock markets, equities, nothing is stopping the stock market. This would be the sort of thing that Donald Trump puts wind in his sails. I do think that if he gets to the point where he really sticks with a 50% tariff on copper, and then it takes a little while to play itself out in the economy, and then consumers really start seeing it and feeling it, because he has that bullshit time horizon of months or many months, that will cause him to pull back to the extent where he says, I have the tariffs. You just said, I have the 10% tariffs. He's a showman. He's a hypester. He's an inveterate bullshit artist. He'll be able to claim victory just like he did with Wall and sections of Wall in the first term, without having economy reshaping tariffs, which is always what he promised. But in a way, thank God, because the way they would reshape the economy is almost entirely on the downside.
Susan, I was super struck this week. It was sort of a tariff story, not really, about a New York Times story about BYD, the Chinese electric car maker, that in a few years has gone from being basically non-existent to being, very soon it will be the largest car maker on earth. And that's because they make EVs for China, but also now for lots of other markets that are way cheaper than American counterparts, and way better, apparently, in most respects. And they cost half, a third the price. We can't get them in the U.S. largely because of tariffs, but they're getting everywhere. And it's not that China is competing unfairly. I mean, there were state subsidies into this company, and of course, there's state backing to this company. But it's because they're making something that's a better product. And one thing that I find so incredibly demoralizing in the Trump economy is the abandonment of the very things that will make us have companies that are competitive with BYD. We've defunded universities. We're defunding science. We are making it impossible for people, international students who might become great engineers, to come study here. It's really depressing that our substitute for long-term thinking is short-term tariffs.
Depressing is definitely one word for it, David. I mean, I think that's the big picture frame for me as well, is the idea that this is quite possibly the biggest own goal in the history of the world. America's greatest threat, it's long been said, right, is itself. And, I think of that all the time. I think back to a conversation that I had at the very beginning of Trump's first term here in Washington with Strobe Talbot, who was then the head of the Brookings Institution, former Deputy Secretary of State. And he said, Susan, you're sitting here, and just a few minutes ago, sitting where you're sitting was the Japanese National Security Advisor. And I asked him, why was he here on this trip to Washington? What did he hope to get out of it? And the Japanese National Security Advisor said, well, I'm here because Washington is the greatest epicenter of global instability in the world today. And I think we've gone from instability and uncertainty, and frankly, that's the theme that's run through this whole conversation, whether we're talking about foreign policy or tariffs or, any of the stories of the week. But it's gone from just global instability to something, I think, even more malicious, which is the organism is eating itself now, right? And, we are essentially engaging in acts of self-harm, which Russia and China on some level could only dream about. You mentioned this electric car story and China and what the Trump administration is doing to American academia in the name of purging political correctness from our college campuses. I was on a call the other day with a very senior former U.S. official engaged in China policy and Chinese analyst. And what do you think the number of Chinese students, foreign students, is down to in the U.S. today?
I mean, wasn't it something like 200,000 before?
Yeah, exactly. It's in the single thousands now.
Whoa.
Okay, that is unbelievable. And it reflects maybe not the new permanent normal, but it reflects not only a kind of real decoupling, right? In the last few years, this has been the big buzzword in foreign policy circles, right? This idea that, people want to decouple the two economies, especially a lot of hawkish Republicans. They want to sort of rip away our interdependence and the entire foundation of this globalized economic order. But that is something that will have consequences decades from now, right? We're not going to be embedded in each other's economies, in each other's societies, if we can't speak to each other. And those students were part of how we did it, first of all. Second of all, of course, many of the most brilliant Chinese students or Indian students or African students, for years, United States has been a beacon. And they come here and they stay. And the percentages, for example, in Silicon Valley of founders of startups who came to this country as immigrants or as students, it's off the charts. I believe it's even like a majority. You can fact check me on that. But I just think that is the backdrop for the tariff conversation. But it's much more broad than that, because it's actually what we're doing to ourselves. And tariffs are a metaphor for that, because Donald Trump claims, not truthfully, that this is something that is somehow a cost paid for by other countries, when in reality, it's a cost paid for by ourselves.
It is an absolute shame where, in the name of owning the libs, giving up what would be a very lucrative and very necessary sector, which is renewable energy, to just cede this to China in some backwards fit of pique is stupid and makes no sense. And the last note is the BYDs, the Build Your Dream cars. I was saying to myself, these cars in Chinese, it can't stand for Build Your Dream. How'd that work? And it is indeed a retronym. They were the Chinese version of BYD I'm pronouncing it wrong, for many years. And then when they were tried to be shipped to the West, but not America, they renamed them BYD. And it reminded me of Arby's, which did not stand for America's roast beef, yes, sir. But as a retronym, people said it did.
Oh, I was wondering about BYD. Thank you. That was good.
It's a BFD.
I just looked up the number here, and the percentage of technology workers in Silicon Valley who are foreign born, according to the 2025 Silicon Valley Index, is 66%. More than half of America's biggest tech companies founded or run by foreign-born people.
Yeah. And Trump lied about that and lied about the visas, went on the All In podcast, said, oh, yeah, I like that because he's perhaps not to be trusted.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. Mike Pesca. I've had cocktails with you, I think. Although maybe you're so fit now, maybe you don't have cocktails.
With cocktails, yes. Only Michelob Ultras. but with a raw egg in them.
When you're chatting with Mrs. Pesca and the little Pescas, what are you going to be chattering about?
Well, I was looking at, and this is a very Plotzy type statistic. I was looking at traffic deaths, and I was made to look at traffic deaths because in New York City, we have had 87 so far this year, and this was after a year of having over 200. And for many years, Bill de Blasio tried to get those traffic deaths down, and it was always very hard when, in fact, Hoboken, a city across the river, would have no traffic deaths some years. How did they do this? Well, things seem to be working. And in fact, nationally in the United States, traffic deaths have declined for the last 10 quarters. It's one of those statistics that's because there was a huge spike after the pandemic. But what a great statistic. What a great, not just a statistic, marry the actual number of people who are now alive and walking around and didn't know that they could have been killed under the old regime. I will say that a lot of the congestion pricing advocates, which seem to have a lot to recommend it, they're talking about the plunge of traffic deaths as a result of congestion pricing, and maybe your mind fixes to that. There's only in the area below 96th Street, there's only been 4 traffic deaths so far this year, but last year there was only 7. So traffic deaths are one of those things. I look at homicides, I look at traffic deaths. They're extremely important because keeping people alive, especially the people who die in traffic deaths, are normally young, able-bodied people, is exactly what our society should be doing. And we're actually doing it well. And I don't know that we're giving ourselves credit for doing it well. I don't think in the mayoral race, Eric Adams is going to get elected for doing it well. But more people living, it seems so stupid. And yet, don't we gloss by this so often when we consider what our government should be doing? Many more people are living.
Are you saying this is a New York? This is happening in New York, but is it happening nationwide?
Yeah, nationwide for 10 consecutive quarters, traffic deaths have been declining. It's a little like homicides. There was a huge spike. People went nuts during the pandemic, but we've been getting it down, more people living. That's nationally. But in New York, it's really, really pronounced.
Nationally, is it below pre-pandemic or still above?
No,
it's still well above.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. I commend to both of you, to me, one of the greatest articles written in the past decade, Marin Kogan's article about stroads, which are the pernicious effect of basically streets that are roads, which is a place which has the function of a street and that people live on it, and it should be therefore quiet and calm, but because of where it is or how it's been built, it acts like a road that people are driving really fast on it. And so there's been huge upsurge of stroads. You can think of, I'm trying to think if there's a couple outside of DC that are really prominent, and those are a magnet for traffic deaths. And it was just an amazing piece about these ill-designed roads and how they cause people to get killed because there's not enough places to cross the street. Cars are going too fast. People are not paying very much attention as they're driving because they think it's more or less like a highway. And so they sort of tune out, and it's a recipe for disaster. Susan, what is your chatter?
Well, I wasn't going to go in this direction, but since we're being upbeat here about statistics, I think this idea, which Mike mentioned about the U.S. murder rate, it's not just the traffic deaths. The scale of the transformation here is pretty astonishing. And actually, right now, apparently the U.S. murder rate is possibly headed towards its lowest point ever recorded, which is really something. So it's not just that we've gone back down below the spike that happened in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, but actually there's a strong possibility that the U.S. could go down to something like 4.45 murders per 100,000 people, which would surpass the previous record low, which was in 2014, so well before the pandemic. I don't claim to understand this. I don't claim to be a cockeyed optimist about anything that's happening in the country right now, but I do think it's really notable. I was struck by this actually over the 4th of July weekend, and I heard a report saying there were absolutely no homicides in a major American city, and that just never happens. And, again, I don't pretend to be able to explain this, but I recognize I often dwell on the bad news. So I suppose this is just unequivocally good news that we should celebrate even if we don't understand it.
Yeah. Heck yes. My chatter, too quickly, I just want to reference Kyla Scanlon's great Substack. I don't know much about Kyla Scanlon. She was just interviewed by Ezra Klein, but I do get her Substack, and it's really good. And there's this amazing piece she wrote this week about how the United States has become an extractive economy rather than a productive economy. And it's a comparison between the US and China, and how China is investing all these in human capital and power generation, and the United States is instead investing in financialization and gutting its productive capacity. It's just a great framing of this topic. So I recommend Kyla Scanlon. But my actual chatter is about, so I was on vacation. When you're on vacation, you get a chance to sometimes read in things you might not otherwise read. And so I ended up reading Clan of the Cave Bear. I don't know if you guys ever read that
a long time ago.
in your youth. So it's a 1980 novel.
I read Daryl Hannah's portrayal in it in the movie.
Yes. So it's a first of a series called the Earth's Children novel by a novelist called Jean Auel. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name. And it's about a Neanderthal tribe that adopts a human child, Ayla. It's an extremely silly book in a lot of ways. Extremely silly, romanticizes the life of Neanderthals. But I loved it. I thought it was so beautiful and gripping. And it also just like the imagination to recreate this kind of life. It's in the way that sometimes great science fiction, where the imagined world, the conjured up world is so, or great fantasy is so moving. This is one that's based on some knowledge that we have about Neanderthal life, but it does it spectacularly. I loved it. So if you remember it, or you only remember the kind of hideous visuals from the Daryl Hannah movie of Clan of the Cave Bear, give it a chance. It's a pretty stunning book. Listeners, you have sent us chatters. Please keep them coming by emailing them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Something that you are chattering about with your beloveds. And our listener chatter this week comes from Alan Spatrick.
Hi, Gabfest. This is Alan Spatrick from Newton, Massachusetts. My chatter today could absorb all your free time, but hear me out. Andrew Hickey's A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs is an epic podcast series begun in 2018, ending by maybe 2030. Each episode runs a half hour, is musically fascinating, and puts each song in its political, cultural, and societal context. The series starts in 1939 with Flying Home by Benny Goodman, but Hickey insists there is no one first rock and roll song. It's followed by songs by greats like Rosetta Tharpe, Hank Williams, and Big Joe Turner. The series is 20 songs old before it even gets to Rock Around the Clock in 1954. One episode excavates House of the Rising Sun by the Animals, a song about New Orleans with roots in English folk that became an Appalachian ballad by an English blues band who learned it from a noted Minnesota folk singer in New York City. Love your show.
That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed about whether ICE agents should be allowed to do their jobs in masks. That, however, is just for Slate Plus members. Slate Plus members also get lots of other great stuff for their subscriptions. They get bonus episodes of many Slate shows. They get discounts to live shows. They don't hit the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy our bonus episode. If you're not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. Mike Pesca, do you guys have a Gist Plus? Is there a Gist Plus?
Well, we in fact have a Pesca Plus, which is an ad-free and also a bonus episode. Yeah, the whole thing.
Pesca
and
Plus.
Then and then, of course, the Gist List on Substack, which is a daily compendium of all the crazy news you're missing.
Pesca, you call it Pesca Plus?
We got a Pesca Plus to listen to, and we got a Gist List to read on Substack.
How do you feel about your name being your brand?
It was my choice, or it was thrust upon me, something like this. I mean, if it trips off the tongue, does it not? How could we avoid it?
That is our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Kevin Bendis. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For the delightful Mike Pesca and Susan Glasser, who are such game and brilliant guests. I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. John and Emily will be back next week, they assure me.